This never works in any other kind of gathering, whether it be church, synagogue, or anywhere, but please come forward, and you can still leave early. But John's got better eyes than I do, but I can't see the back row, so good thing I'm not in sales.
I will probably stand, actually, once I get going.
Okay, I will too. I'll move over there. I just need a surface, because otherwise I thought these cars, I'll drop them in the road.
This has been a long process for people to come out 3 nights in a row.
Oh, I know. Well, very good time.
Well, that's good. I was concerned that by the 3rd night it might have shrunk significantly, but whatever.
Did you miss it?
I think it's in my resume.
Oh, okay. Obviously, I don't remember. Okay, if I may have your attention, please. Our first question tonight is right after I make this statement, and that is that I apologize to you. Oprah was busy, so you're stuck with me for one more night. But thank you all for coming again. And the first question, and just like the others, it won't be a question, but we'll give John just 2 to 3 minutes to say why he would like to be the superintendent in Brookline, and then we'll start in with the questions. So, John, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. One of the dangers of this kind of day is that some people have kind of followed you around for the day, and it's hard not to repeat yourself a little bit and be fresh. But I want to use an example that I did use earlier in the day because I just think that it so captures who Brookline is. Many of you know Mary Birchenall or know of her. She's an extraordinary teacher at the high school, the head of the English department. And I remember about 20 years ago, she wrote an amazing poem that moved me very deeply. And it's about a mother who was a Russian immigrant to Bedford, who on back-to-school night is kind of hovering about her desk, not knowing what to do with her hands and halting English, is trying to communicate. And the teacher finally figures out that what the parent is asking is, can you love my child? And I think in so many ways that captures what's special about Brookline. I think Brookline is filled with amazing teachers who truly love kids. And that's the starting point for everything we do as educators. I think it's also filled with immensely talented teachers, many of whom are distinguished in their own right. And bring so much richness into their work. I think it speaks to the diversity that's so uniquely Brookline, and it speaks to the partnering between families and schools that I think is so important to education. So Brookline is just, it's a very wonderful, unique place, and it has it also does something which I think a lot of districts don't do, which is that it has found remarkable ways to create safe spaces for every kind of child, not only different by ethnicity or race, but by disposition, by personality, by the way in which they're choosing to develop their own identities. And that richness of experience and that incredible wealth of diversity is very special to Brookline. I happen to love where I am right now, where I was a principal for 12 years and been a superintendent for 4 years. It's also a very diverse community with parents that really love and support education and wonderful teachers. I have an amazing leadership team. So why leave it? No matter how compelling Brookline is. And I think the answer to that is partly that I cut my leadership teeth here when I was a curriculum coordinator for social studies. My youngest daughter went through the school system. There's some ways in which I'd love to give back. I'm very cognizant of the challenges that Brookline is facing right now, and I think I think quite humbly, but I think I have some of the skills that would be very helpful to solving those issues and moving the district forward in some really important ways. And finally, just personally, I think I'm ready for another level of challenge in my own professional development and career. And I think this would be a wonderful opportunity to do that. So that's why Brookline at this time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Before I ask the next question, I need to say this to the people who are watching but are not here tonight, and that is that if you were looking for the last night's candidates interview, that has not been up yet, but will be soon, and you will get an extended period of time after that to get up any response. We want to make certain that's possible for you to do. I can't tell you when it will be up, but it should be up very soon. They're working on it right now. And we will try to give you 24 hours from that time period, but we do want to get the feedback as soon as possible, so the quicker you can do it after you see it, the better it will be to guarantee that your responses get to the school committee before they do their, before they get all the information, okay? Thank you. So this one, I'm really anxious to hear your answer. I've heard you all day and had a lot of great comments, but this one was not asked before. How does your time as a machinist at GE rather, influence your work in education?
Somebody read the resume closely. I think in some really interesting ways. So many educators, they go through academia and go right into the classroom and they never leave. And I think that working in the world of mechanics and in a factory with 12,000 people making jet engines and steam turbines, it really taught me something about the relationship between learning and other kind of real world experiences. And to me, the best learning has authenticity to it. And so as a teacher, I was often able to draw on that experience, both to better understand the range of kids before me, some of whom were not natural academic learners, and to appreciate the professions and the careers that might be more hands-on instead of minds-on. I can think it just deepened my understanding of the real world. Secondly, I was a union activist at that time, and so my appreciation of the important ways in which people combine to improve their working conditions, I think, stems in part from that. And I've drawn on that organizing background to organize other superintendents to make change at the state level. Whether it's been kind of leading the process of reforming the NEASC accreditation process, which has been an exciting process of making that a much more useful process, whether it's been improving the Metco organization, or whether it's been pushing back against some of the state mandates, aspects of which have been useful, but other aspects of which I think are not helpful to kids. So pulling superintendents together to make a difference, to help create the conditions for teachers to do what they do best is part of my wheelhouse.
Thank you. John, if appointed, how long do you plan on staying as superintendent in Brookline?
My sense of that is that I'm looking for 6 years, maybe 6, 7, 8 years. Nothing short of that. I still feel very energized by this work. I've been at it for 40 years or so. It's what I love. It's what I feel passionate about. From a more personal point of view, my years as a machinist or my years working in an inner city parochial school don't count towards retirement. So I also have that goal in mind. So I have no intention of leaving early. So that's kind of my sense of the time frame.
Okay, very good, thank you. How would you suggest that the current impasse between the teachers union and the school committee be resolved?
So I think that I need to qualify this by saying that the devil is always in the detail. And I could have some platitudes here, and I'll make some general observations and speak about my experience. But I can't pretend to know that answer unless I really knew the details in terms of what the budget is, what the pressures on that budget are in terms of enrollment, and how that impacts what's available to address the time for planning needs that the teachers are talking about. So part of my answer really would depend on greater detail. What I will say is that I'm used to a different model of negotiation where the superintendent does the negotiating of the contracts. And I certainly am prepared to respect the Brookline culture and the Brookline way, but I would want to work my way into that process to some degree. And I think there's really credible value in both approaches. It's nice to protect the superintendent. In my district, the school committee is not involved at all across the table. They're involved in helping to set the parameters, and they ultimately approve the contract. But I think that so much of what makes an organization, an educational organization, work has to do with relationships. And that relationship between the association and the administration is a key relationship. And how you build trust over time by meeting regularly, and also by respecting each other across the table, being able to look into each other's eyes and really communicate that what you're saying is available is sometimes benefits from that. My sense is that teachers everywhere are reeling under the pressure of being asked to do more without adequate resources. And Brookline, everybody thinks Brookline has great deep pockets, but Brookline has a very small commercial base. It doesn't have great deep pockets, and yet expects a lot from its teachers. We've changed our entire paradigm in education, where we now expect every child to be a high achiever, and that's phenomenal. But it requires of teachers a level of differentiation and planning and collaboration that needs to be supported with time. And so the solution certainly is in trying to create a sense of partnership in how to resolve those issues. And they may not be able to be answered in the first year or in the second year, but if there's a sense that there's a common goal that is being worked towards, I think it's more likely that the teachers are willing to accept less than they might want up front. So sometimes it's hard conversations, but I think transparency, I think really being clear about what's available is part of it. My experience also is doing a lot of work leading up to negotiation and in coming to agreement around certain norms and certain protocols for how we're going to negotiate. And that sometimes those boundaries help to create trust and safety in the process. I don't think it's an easy solution, but I would certainly love to have the opportunity to participate in it.
Thank you. We hear a great deal about closing the achievement gap and working to ensure that we raise those kids who are not achieving at the level that we would like. But a lot of parents are concerned that does that come at the expense of those who are already achieving well, and we need to continue to challenge them. And then there's the middle that's between those two. So the question basically is, how do you propose within that kind of environment to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all kids, regardless of where they fall on it?
It's funny, at the end of last year, my middle school principal was doing a school improvement plan and was talking about all of the programs to support struggling learners. And one of the school committee members at the end said, anything for gifted learners, anything for kids that are excelling? And in fact, there was plenty, but he wasn't speaking to it because he just assumed it was there. And I think you can't assume that because I think that it's important to create both a culture of expectations and to provide the structures and the mechanisms to ensure that every child is challenged and supported in the ways that he or she needs to be challenged. Now, part of that is how you define teaching and learning in the first place. So, and I shared this in an earlier conversation, you know, when I was looking at school improvement plans here in Brookline and some of the special programs like the Challenge Enrichment and Support Program, what it looked like is that only the kids that are in that program were really getting rich project-based learning, thinking that those are the kids that can do that work. But that's what all kids should be immersed in. And deepening the learning and in rigorous ways for all kids is part of the answer to that question. But then it's about recognizing the needs of individuals, starting in the elementary grades and on up through the high school. You know, we had, I think I mentioned this also in answer to another question, but a child who, you know, had completed calculus in 8th grade and had nowhere to go in our math program. You know, so we designed a whole program for him to get him through high school, to keep linear algebra, you know, keep getting the kind of challenges he needs. But part of how you make sure that happens is to have a method of collecting data and reflecting upon that data to make sure the kids aren't missed. And also creating the conversations among teachers that says that it's important to meet the needs of all kids, whether they're average learners, accelerated learners, or struggling learners. So I think that, again, devil's in the detail. I don't know what those structures are here. I don't know how that's communicated. I don't know how that data is developed and then follows the child through their career so that you know, they don't fall through the cracks. But I think reviewing those processes is always worthwhile.
Thank you. What do you think that you, John, can bring to Brookline that no one else could?
Is that a real question?
That's a real question. I have it right here if you want to read it. It doesn't have John in it, but it does say you.
I don't think there's anything I could bring to Brookline that nobody else could, because that would be pretty presumptuous. I do think that I have a unique skill set. And I think that I have a unique set of experiences that would be useful in Brookline. And those are, number one, about a really deep passion for teaching and learning and for complicating kids' thinking, for developing them as real independent learners. Done a lot of work around metacognition and helping teachers help kids become more aware and in charge of their own learning. And I have a deep passion for equity and for closing achievement gaps and for tackling upfront difficult issues around diversity. But I think that one of the things that I am proud of beyond that it really has to do with who I am as a leader and my deep belief in people and my belief that education is a beautifully hard, challenging, joyful, messy process, but it's a deeply humane process, and that it doesn't work if the organization doesn't feel humane and people feel that they are given the space to be the best that they can be. And so I pride myself on trying to create cultures and nurture cultures where that happens and where we bring out the best in people. And part of that is in creating teams that really support each other and amplify those talents and make sure that the talent here is shared so that the kids over here get the same thing. And it also is about respecting the creativity and the innovation that really make the difference in the end. So that's my attempt at an answer.
Okay, thank you. This one is a softball for you, but it's an important question. This proves that everybody here does their homework, too. What is the Andrew Hacker Award? Somebody else read your bio.
The Andrew Hacker Award was the best undergraduate paper at Cornell for government, and I did a thesis on how race and class intersected through the life of W.E.B. Du Bois. And it's a pretty good paper.
Did you get an A?
I did.
Okay, good.
And my roommate's girlfriend called me Andy ever after that. Andy Hacker. Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to read this one word for word so I don't blow it. There are many examples in every school across the country and here in Brookline of children of color suffering from microaggressiveness in the classroom. from both the teachers and their student peers. How have you worked to address and change classrooms in this regard in Bedford?
This is something we work hard at all the time, and we try to get better at. No quick, easy solutions, but some of the elements involved. Every teacher in Bedford, by contract, when they enter Bedford, has to take an anti-racism course. And for a long time, I think we thought that that was doing the trick, but it wasn't. Without structures, without conversations, without a culture that really kind of makes front and center the importance of creating safety for kids to take intellectual risks, to be themselves, and to not be rendered invisible, to not feel that comments that may be hurtful are ignored by a teacher who's afraid to address them, and so they're victimized twice, who don't get approached as learners based on their strengths. That takes a lot of work to move a culture forward around that. We've created a district-wide equity and diversity committee made up of teachers and administrators, and we work with the central administration team of principals to develop professional development programs to build on the work that teachers have already done. We have trained 40, 50 teachers to be facilitators of how to have difficult conversations around race in their classrooms, and brought in some wonderful trainers. We try to develop the skill set of our teachers. An example of how that's been effective, about a year ago, one of our African-American senior students, a young woman, made a video called Shit White People Say. And it was a very provocative video about her perception of how race was being dealt with at Bedford High School. And she showed it in her classroom, and she got applauded by all the kids and by the teacher as being a wonderful effort. So she decided to sneak it onto the morning television program that goes to all the kids. And there was a major fallout from that. A lot of kids felt attacked, and you're saying I'm a racist. And in the end, and we got hate mail from white supremacist groups from all over the country, and it was in the newspaper, but we dealt with it head on. And in the end, when I sat with this child and her parents, and I said, that was such a courageous thing to do. You're going to be quite a leader as you go off to college. But I want you to understand something about context. Because if you want to be effective, context is everything. And it worked in your classroom, but without being able to contextualize it for the whole school, it caused more defensiveness than not. But what happened in the wake of that is that teachers in physics classrooms, math classrooms, not just social studies classrooms, carried on the conversation in their classrooms about this incident. And they never would have done that if they hadn't had the training that provided them with some of the skill and some of the confidence to be able to do that. We do a lot of professional development through an ed camp approach, which is where the teachers design the professional development for each other, and during a full-day workshop, teachers choose the different workshops that they want to go to. And just a couple months ago, on a full day, a couple of our science teachers who took that experience, they created a workshop about continuing the conversation about race, and it was the most widely attended workshop. So that's just, one small example, but it takes that kind of very deliberate work. When we took educator evaluation and tried to take what was good out of it and push back and organize against what's not good about it, one of the things that's good about it is that it uses rubrics to identify important behaviors for good teaching. And what we've done with that around, for example, the cultural proficiency rubric, is we've asked all of our faculties to unpack that, which means what does cultural proficiency look like in the classroom as a teacher and as a student, and to kind of develop a common language around that so that we can own that and then, and move forward together. So that's an example. But it's a multifaceted, ongoing process.
Okay, thank you. A related set of questions, there are 6 of these. I'm going to summarize and try to do one of them that I think speaks to all of the others that were asked, and it's basically this. Brookline, like many school districts, is concerned about having a diverse faculty. You've made and supported significant advances in this area. How did you do it?
We have made some significant advances, but far from enough. It's been really challenging, and I think in some ways, Bedford, which actually has a very diverse population. We're about 14% low income, about 29% non-white, 7% ELL. But because of its remoteness, it's a lot harder to attract teachers of color into that area. We've done it, hired a very amazing principal of the high school, and have worked with all of our hirers by being very clear about the priority and really kind of demanding that they do their due diligence to try to create a pool. So we've had some success by reaching out to schools of education and trying to create a pipeline that way. I think Brookline's in a really unique position, and I know that we've lost some teachers over the years, but because of the enrollment increases, I think we really need to see that as an opportunity, because there's going to be a lot of hiring, and shame on us if that's not used to make a difference. As I've said before in a couple other forums, one of the things that needs to happen is need to interrupt a process which ends up kind of squeezing out other candidates. You know, we take these wonderful interns from the teaching schools, Leslie Simmons, et cetera, but they're invariably young white women, and they're terrific. And after being a practicum or an intern, you know, that's who you hire because she's done a great job. So, and then there's no positions left. So one thing is to not rely on that and to really create some other avenues through developing relationships. And I know Deb Holman is beginning to try to do this with a team at the high school, reaching out to universities. The other thing is to reinstitute a practice that existed here a long time ago. A gentleman by the name of Sam Turner created a team that would go to historically black colleges in the South and do direct recruiting there. I think it's time to do that. I've got some wonderful people in mind that would love to do that work. And then the question is, how do you support them and how do you hold on to them? And I think part of it is thinking in terms of cohorts where they can support each other. And also I think it means really bringing parents into that process, because the richness of the diversity of our parent and family community, and I think kind of bridging that and creating some support networks that way for our teaching staff might go a long way to holding on. But teachers who don't see issues of racism being dealt head on and up front, you know, they're not going to stay. They're going to look for places where that happens. Not in all cases. There are certainly teachers of color for whom that's not a priority, but I think it's been my experience that for many it is.
Then one more in that same arena, and that is, in your current district, what is the breakdown, in other words, the percentage of minority teachers in your direct reports? And if so, what minorities are represented?
So again, it's woefully low. Again, we have one African American principal, the high school principal, who we've just lost to Newton North after 4 years. He came out of Newton. We hired him out of Newton, and he's going back. Great guy. Huge loss. We have at each of our elementary schools, so that's in terms of direct reports. We have maybe 2 or 3 African American, maybe 1 Asian, 1 Latino. And at the high school, partly because of our world language courses, we've been able to diversify a little more in our English department and in our guidance department, but very small.
Okay, thank you. We've had a number of questions brought to us from Facebook, and I've read you one before, but I wanted to identify that so people who are doing the Facebook work recognize that we are using them. And this one I have to read to make certain I get it right. Teaching children to be critical thinkers and to have the ability to evaluate data and information has always involved a broad education in the humanities. How do we go about teaching that skill and applying it in the modern technological world?
So one of the things we're really excited about in Bedford is we're creating a K through 12 programming curriculum. And we have kids learning to code in second grade and even actually doing some Scratch programming in kindergarten. We have some maker spaces in our elementary schools where kids are taking these programmable spheres and teaching them how to do some complex operations. And we have a very robust robotics program that's curricular rather than extracurricular, both at the middle school and the high school. And we have a very robust computer science series of offerings at the high school, which is highly different. One of the best examples of differentiated learning. This teacher is able to take kids from wherever they are, get them up to C++, do all these things. But what's so important to me about this is that the whole process of coding is a way of thinking. It is a way of problem solving. It's a way of saying, I want this to happen. What are the steps that I need to do to make that happen? It taps into executive functioning, and it taps into kind of creative problem solving. And so that kind of thinking and that kind of learning is really benefited by a kind of coding curriculum. The other is our emphasis on engineering. And I'll give you a great example that answers this question and also talks about my vision for teaming. So one of the things that we've taken out of the educator evaluation system that I think is good is that we have had all of our teacher teams have to choose a professional practice goal that aligns with one of our 2 or 3 key district focus areas. And then they work on that as a team and design curriculum or instruction to impact kids. So we have a group of second grade teachers who had a unit on bugs. But what they agreed to is that the essential learning was that the kids would learn the engineering process of planning, designing, executing, and then they would learn some ELA skills around the research around comprehension of non-fiction texts. And they agreed that that would be in all of their classes. And then they got creative in how they would do that. So one teacher had the kids designing the habitat and making a habitat and doing the research and showing how the bugs' particular characteristics were supported by that habitat. Another one had the kids creating the bugs, but they had to engineer and design the process. So, and then they debriefed that together. They looked at each other's projects. They looked at the learning that was done. And they talked about how to improve that the next time. And they talked about which kids were not getting it and what they had to do to change the instruction for next time. So that's how I want teams to function in schools. But it's also a great example of how you balance creativity and coherence. And it's a really good example of how you can develop kids' thinking as problem solvers through the sciences rather than just being absorbers of discrete information.
Okay, thank you. A lot of questions on overcrowding, as you would guess. I'm talking about the 9th elementary, the overcrowding and its effect on high school. So a couple of questions, or a couple of preliminaries, and then the question. One person said that due to the overcrowding at the high school, they see a number of their friends pulling their kids out and going to private school, and obviously they would rather have them stay at that school. But as you look at all the space issues, how do you view what you're going to do to address that? And what kind of creative solutions might you bring forward?
This is another one where the devil's in the detail, and I've done as much homework as I can.
The devil gets in there all the time.
It does. Not as an excuse, but really, I don't want to presume to know. I know that a couple of years ago, there was a huge study done on what kind of learning needed to be maintained in Brookline. I know that that we've been having meetings in different parts of the town to look at where our location for a 9th elementary school could be. So certainly one of my #1 priorities in terms of this job would be to immerse myself in that immediately because time is of the essence. I have been thinking about it from my outside perspective a little bit, and I share this more as an example of thinking outside the box. But I think there are a couple elements that are important to me. One is that whatever happens, the community has to be very deeply involved in those solutions. The community is going to have to own the results of any building solution that happens. And I think respecting the community's voice and bringing that in will help to offset some of the angst and some of the anger that may come from some of those solutions. So, a 9th elementary school will require redistricting, and that's going to be a very painful process if that's what happens. School districts can survive that, but it's not an easy process. And so involving the community at every stage so that it doesn't feel like it's being something done to, but the community helps to define what the values are that you're trying to maintain is important. I've been thinking kind of creatively about how to maintain what's uniquely Bedford. First time, all day. What's uniquely Brookline, but solve this problem in a very cost-effective way and least disruptive way. And so I've been thinking about maintaining our K-7 school and creating an 8th and 9th grade school instead of a 9th elementary school. Do that at the other end of Cypress Field. It allows for the potential of some very creative learning structured. We had a 9th grade campus years ago that Piper was the principal of when we did the renovation at the high school, and they were able to do some amazing things when they had just the 9th graders. I think that for 8th graders, it's getting a little old by 8th grade. I remember my daughter was pretty much ready, but by up through 7th grade, you certainly want that nurturing continuum. So this would mean you wouldn't have to add on to the high school. You would empty out spaces at every elementary school so you could move in the early childhood and you can absorb some of the overages that are going to happen at every school. You've got the imbalance between it being largely in the Pierce area and largely in the South Brookline area, and either solution is going to not solve the other one without doing major restructuring. So I don't know what the solution is. I think there's some value in thinking outside the box, trying to preserve what is unique about the K-8 system, but making a tweak, not creating a junior high school, but something very different. But if not, then I think, if it's going to move in the other direction, and I've done a fair amount of work with MSBA. In fact, I educated the kids of the present chair of the MSBA, but they become very prescriptive in their process, very limiting. I think whatever we do, it's got to be so transparent and that the parents have to own it so that, they're willing to tolerate what the impact is going to be because it's going to be disruptive no matter what. So.
Okay. A couple of lighter questions. Sure. What do you do when you're not working?
So I am a proud father of 3 girls and a grandfather of a 12-year-old boy and a 9-year-old granddaughter. And family is very important to me. My wife is a substance abuse therapist working mainly with adolescents around drugs and alcohol. We do a lot of passing in the night because my commute from Bedford is quite long. And so every night that I'm out there, I never come home first, so there'd be some real advantages to being more local. I am a pretty voracious reader. I kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I walk about 3 or 4 miles a day, and I listen to books on tape when I do that so that I can get my reading in. And I have become, in the last 10 years, a golfer. And that's really what I love to do. It's addicting. I mean, it's just an amazing sport. So I was a big tennis player, but my shoulder just doesn't tolerate it anymore. So.
Okay, and the other one's really serious. What do you think of Bill Belichick?
Horrible person, amazing coach. Ask me what I think of Brady.
No, you're going to get one answer. You don't.
We are big Patriot fans, but that doesn't mean that we're not critical sometimes of individuals and some of their behaviors and dispositions. My wife particularly is the biggest fan.
Very good, thank you. We had to throw that one in. Read this one again. We've had a number around this area before. Many parents feel that math in K-8 is not good enough and send their kids to the Russian math school. How will you make sure that math in schools is addressing every student's level, also the high school level?
First, I better qualify what I just said. I don't know if Belichick's a horrible person. He's probably a very nice person. He has a horrible disposition, all right? But he's a great coach.
He does come to these meetings every once in a while.
The Crafts, gave the money that transformed Downs Field, which I live on, into into artificial turf. And I was involved with the community in pushing back on that. Unlike a lot of my neighbors, I thought that it was really important to have the field because kids need the space. But what I wanted was not to have my front yard have garish blues and yellows kind of built into the grass like you have there at Northeastern. And so we said, hey, we'll support it, just make it green. And they did. And so that was a successful organizing attempt as well. We're seeing a lot of kids, getting tutoring in math in Bedford, for a long time we thought that was a response to some a teacher or two that maybe needed some work, and so kids were finding the support elsewhere. But it seems to be so pervasive today. It's just it's become a whole industry and a whole way of doing math education. And I think that schools really need to take that on, both by making sure that the teaching is great and well differentiated for kids, and offering the range of courses that keep kids challenged. And so we've been really experimenting with that in terms of initially we only had one kind of calculus. We now have 3 different kinds of calculus so that kids who are not as capable math students can get there, but certainly our BC calculus has just kind of gone through the roof. And we believe that our most talented teachers should teach all kids, kids who struggle and kids who really excel. But we happen to have an amazing BC calculus teacher now who really, really challenges the kids and keeps them engaged. I don't know enough about how that's happening in Brookline. I don't know enough about what the quality of math education is. But I think that if that question is a reflection that there are some concerns about math being challenging enough and also having the supports there, then it would be something we'd have to look at.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell us how you feel about Metco and materials fee students? We have a space crunch. Should we, quote, hold those programs until we get our space needs under control?
I think that putting those two things together may be a little bit of problematic for me, because I think that both are important and both are a service. One is, has a long history of kind of a way of honoring teachers and providing an option that, says that we respect the work that you do and that give. But if something had to give, for me, it would be that rather than Metco, because Metco represents something much deeper about who Bedford is as a community and about a commitment to the
They both start with B. That's not fair. You have to.
BHS, it was, anyway, I apologize for that. I am a little tired, so forgive me. For me, and I've always been upfront about this, and it's been harder to be upfront about this in a community that I don't live in because, in Bedford, I'm an employee and I don't pay taxes there. So I have to be very thoughtful about how I say this. But in Brookline, I would say it up front, and that is we have a Metco program because we still have segregation in our society. And we have segregated housing, and we have unequal opportunity for people, which is still systemic. And we wouldn't need that program if all of our communities were fully integrated. So as long as that's the case, Metco absolutely has to be supported. And I think any step away from it has a kind of a domino effect and would undermine Metco in communities where there isn't as much support for it. And as somebody who's now on the Metco board, has worked hard to revitalize Metco in the last few years. I know that its existence is still somewhat tenuous because of the dysfunctions that existed somewhat in the organization, and I think that it would be really undermining. Again, it would be a really hard and painful thing to take something away from teachers, and this is one I will skirt because I just don't know enough about the choices and what the resources are. But I certainly, just as we've had to say no to teachers in Bedford if there isn't room, because in our contract it's contingent upon there being room, it's not an absolute right. So we're off the charts at kindergarten right now, and I've got a waiting list of teachers' kids, and I've had to say up front, maybe not. So I'm capable of saying no, but it's very different to say it when people know that that's a possibility than to take a program that's long existed and to turn it around. So I would need to know more about that.
Thank you.
How's that for a little dodge? You good?
Well, it's like in the play Chicago, right? They have to dance. What is the responsibility of schools to communicate with and engage parents, and how do you approach this in that other B district?
In that what?
The other B district in Bedford, sorry.
I kind of love to write and find that a very useful tool in many ways. As a high school principal, every year I wrote a graduation poem for the kids. And I have created a very, really wonderful relationship with our local, oh geez, have you been able to hear me? With our local media. And they'll print anything I write. So I write lots of letters to parents and lots of letters to the community around tough issues. For example, when we had all the anti-Semitism, being up front and kind of putting it out there and what our values were and how we were going to address it. Whether it was a series on helping to educate parents around Common Core, high-stakes testing, and what all the controversy about PARC was about, and what my values were around that, and how we were addressing the state as superintendents. So I think part of the job of a superintendent is to be kind of a community educator, and that kind of helping people understand what's going on in the schools, what's going on, in ed reform, is a really important process, because number one, people just want to know, but number two, it creates a better opportunity for people to actually give into that and help to provide solutions or directions when they're more knowledgeable, or provide support when there are tough decisions because they've been informed. So I work very closely with our PTOs and presidents. We meet on a regular basis. And to try to do as much communicating and encouraging my principals to do that. One of the things we learned when we dealt with this whole anti-Semitic piece was, as we created these community meetings, and parents were saying, we're not, your teachers aren't sharing enough about the social emotional curriculum, and how can I partner with them when I don't know what they're teaching my kid in the morning in open circle? And so, at the same time that we brought teaching tolerance in our K through 2, so that all kids were really getting some wonderful learning around self and groups, we changed the way teachers communicated about that, so that they really were much more proactive, so that parents could carry the conversation on at home and kind of amplify what they were doing.
Thank you. 10 years from now, under your leadership, what will you have accomplished, and how would the Brookline schools be different? Short answer question.
There'll be a place for all the kids. Brookline is a system, not unlike some other high-performing systems, that prided itself in having amazing teachers in each classroom, but each teacher was an island unto his or herself. And for capable learners, that was phenomenal, and they got amazing things. But for struggling learners, that's never worked, except for those outlier teachers who made that their focus. And I think that if there's any magic in education, and I'm not talking about this panacea or that initiative, but if there's any magic in education, it's creating a kind of a culture of collaboration and actual structured teaming where teachers are working together and sharing the best of what they do with each other. And actually learning how to even give critical feedback, which is a whole nother step, and we're trying to get there so that teachers, because it's teachers don't want to, especially elementary teachers, saying something negative, that's just not going to happen. Creating that kind of culture. And I think that my sense is Brookline has a way to go in terms of that. Again, not unlike many, many districts. And that transition has to happen in the context of all these other pressures, of all that we're asking teachers to do, of all the mandates that we have to selectively take what's good, push back on what's not. But I think that I would like to see a different kind of teaming and coherence that really celebrates the creativity, but really ensures that all kids are getting the best of what our great teachers have to offer. There are probably many other things, but part of the challenge of that question is one of my jobs, if I get this job, is to create an entry process which is going to be fundamentally a learning process. And I really can't wait to do that if I'm offered this position. I can't wait to get into the schools and meet with parents and meet with teachers. Because I really want to hear much more detail about what is happening in Brookline, so I can help people build on that. So, yeah.
Very good. This person wanted you to hear this part, and that's good evening. Congratulations on being a finalist and making it through this long day.
Thank you.
That was nice. Then it says, the first question is about curriculum and instruction. What are your thoughts on the current literacy program, especially the literacy collaborative model within the K-8 schools, and how might you define rigor within that?
So I think there are some holes in my knowledge here. What I have gleaned from my research is that there's some commonalities across the district, both in terms of having literacy coaches, and in terms of doing Fountas and Pinnell and level literacy programmatically. I think that there are places where there's a more systematic attention to phonics, where foundations is being used, and there are places where it's not being used. So I think that I think all the elements are there, but I think that there may be some value in making sure, and when we bring principals together as instructional leaders and looking at making sure best practices are happening across the district, that maybe there are ways in which you ensure that the best of all of that happens. I was reading in the school improvement plans about the literacy coaches and about how the work that's being done to try to create time for that and for literacy coaches to work with the grade level teachers. But I don't really, I don't have a full grasp on that. In terms of rigor, I'm not sure what the intent of that question is, but I think that as we teach literacy and we teach decoding and the ability to make sense of materials. Where rigor really comes in is in how we help kids make sense of increasingly complex material. We're doing some really wonderful stuff in Bedford with something called Notice and Note, which is a way of helping kids be reflective about what they're reading in very systematic ways. One of the interesting things that happened is when we brought foundations in, because we were noticing that kind of an overly whole language approach had left any kind of phonics teaching aside, that after 3 years of doing that, our teachers said, great, this has been a real improvement, but now we recognize that we haven't spent enough time on comprehension. So we want some training on more ways to make sure that we're helping kids really make sense of what they're reading in meaningful ways. And a lot of that has to do with educating parents. There's a lot of good kind of software for encouraging reading at home, but a lot of parents, when they read with their child, they only think in terms of straight literacy. The kinds of questions they ask really never get at comprehension. It's more a matter of, are you decoding? Are you able to read what's on the page? And so I think in some ways doing some education for parents can really make a difference in terms of helping kids become better readers.
Okay, thank you. You still have enough water, John?
I'm fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
thank you.
This questioner heard from a Bedford parent that you started an initiative for safety after Sandy Hook. Can you elaborate on what that was, please?
Like all school districts, we had crisis plans and drills, et cetera. But after Sandy Hook, we said it's time to take another look once again. So we created a task force that I led with some really amazing parent participants, some of whom had careers in security, some of whom had careers in strategic planning, and I mean strategic in terms of the military. We educate the kids from Hanscom Air Force Base, so we have access to some really interesting people as well. And we explored a lot of things. A lot of parents, were very reactive. They wanted cameras in the schools, and I've always opposed cameras in the schools, and we don't have them still. We have a few external cameras because we decided to make entry safety priority. And we put not a bulletproof, but shatterproof film on all of our front glass and door glass. And we created new protocols for kind of Alice-based protocols for responding to crises. I don't think cameras really get you more safety. In most cases, they're about protecting property, and I don't think that kind of invasion of kids' privacy, because kids are compelled to be in school. It's one thing if you go into a store, you don't have to go into a store, but compulsory education, I really don't like feeding into that. So the school committee has the same values. So we haven't gone with cameras in our schools. And sometimes that's tough when dealing with some tough behavioral issues, but I think it's worth the trade-off. So that task force came up with a bunch of recommendations. We financed them over a period of 2 years, and we are a safer school system, but something you have to keep vigilant about.
Okay, thank you. Brookline is not particularly supportive of youth sports. What is your feeling on the value of sports, and would you be a vocal advocate for improving sports fields and youth involvement?
So I've been an athlete. I love sports. I love golf. Oh my God, do I love golf. Which is more of a head sport than a physical sport, actually. But when I got into education, and as a principal, you're dealing with lots of athletic issues. And at first, I was like, that's not really what I got into education. It's about teaching and learning. It's about a community and social development. And then as my two oldest girls, when we lived in Boston, just when kind of girls' soccer began, and we got them involved in that, partly because we really kind of grasped early on the importance of that kind of social experience, which isn't relational, but it's about being part of a team, and you're on the team because you're good at it, not because you're my best friend, and that those were really important attributes. Both my little 12-year-old and 9-year-old are both black belts in karate now. But I think it was watching my youngest daughter when she went through Brookline High School that really won me to the importance of sports. She was on the volleyball team, and it was that social team experience that was so critical to her entry into the school. And I am just a really strong supporter of that for kids. Bedford is a more traditional community than Brookline in that way, you know, big rah-rah, lots of sports, you know, big football. And yet it took a long time to get our first turf field because the school committee understandably was not willing to lead that charge because we had a number of building projects and we didn't want to squander our capital with the community. So we let the rec department lead that charge and then we supported it. I really think sports are important. They're tremendous team builders, character builders, and they create. And unfortunately, they continue to be one of the places where diverse experience of diverse peers continues to happen. That's something that continues to need to be corrected, but we still need to take advantage of that. So yeah, I would definitely support sports in Brookline.
Including K through 8 elementary golf teams, right?
I could coach it in my spare time.
Okay. I have to read this one carefully, John. The Massachusetts Youth Risk Behavior Survey results have recently been published for Brookline youth. Our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer youth have reported higher risk behaviors such as substance abuse and risky sex, as well as higher rates of mental health, including suicide. What has been your experience in supporting LGBTQ youth in high school and even more importantly for younger youth in K-8 before they come of age?
So Bedford long had a gay-straight alliance. We had a number of gay teachers who provided leadership, a number of straight teachers who really strive hard to create safe spaces for kids. And we've done a fair amount of education around that. I think transgendered children, we've had less experience. There's less representation in the population, and there's a more recent recognition of the needs. And we've had a number of kids, certainly at the high school, and have had to, really do some work with our faculty and also make sure we're providing facilities that worked for the kids. We've only had we've had a few kids at the elementary school, and it's been in a few of those cases, it's been less clear that that's because that's who the kids are as much as because the parents don't believe in gender, and that's been a little hard to manage. Because it's been the kids, have sometimes been victimized, and so how you create a safe space for them is our priority, whatever those parents' reasoning is. And so, it's something that we continue to work at. Interestingly, when I was meeting with the kids in the high school, one of the questions was, what I would do about the fact that in sex education here at the high school, there's no attention to those issues. And I said, well, you know what? I'm not sure we do that in Bedford either. I'm going back and check that out because it should be. And it absolutely should be a part of sex education. I just will say that all schools are dealing with a significant rise in social emotional challenges, both among regular ed kids and kids with special needs, who are diagnosed as such. And I think most of us are responding well in terms of putting resources towards staffing, increasing the number of adjustment counselors, BCBAs, support staff, and also doing the education among our faculty to be sensitive to all those needs.
Okay, thank you. Do you think teachers spend too much time on paperwork, and if so, what should be done about it?
Some of our teachers would say that they do. And there's been a source of frustration for me at times. I have, in several learning initiatives that I've tried to lead over the years, for example, in asking teachers to work together to come up with common learning experiences that they think are important, I've emphasized over and over again, it's the conversation that's important. Yes, we should record that because you want to be able to refer back to it, but it's that exchange that I'm interested in, because you have a lot to contribute, and I want you to forge a sense of ownership and unity around the learning expectations that you think should be priorities. And over and over again, there are teachers that hear that as, got to fill in some boxes, right? So I think that's a challenge for leaders, to really communicate what's important and to have it heard. That being said, I think there are times when teachers are asked to do paperwork that they never see the results of that. And I've been guilty of that a few times in my career, where I've surveyed teachers and I didn't get back to them afterwards. Shame on me, because the next time they're saying, why should I waste my time, And so if you're going to ask teachers to do paperwork, it better be meaningful, and they better at least understand why. And sometimes it's important.
Cool, thank you. Please explain your vision for unifying a school district whose leadership will be new and which is in a town in crisis.
When I became the superintendent, the replacement of the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, special ed director, high school principal, and middle school principal. And we made it work. I will have to say that part of that was because I had been the high school principal, and so there was a continuity that was built in there that we took advantage of. But I think it's possible to do that, if you pay attention to people's needs and you're transparent around your communication. I think that's a big question, and I think I've answered parts of it when I've talked about the culture of leadership. But the piece of it that I didn't think I spoke to is that I think that superintendent is a community leader as well. And I think that building partnerships with the town manager, with the police department, with the fire department, with the selectmen is a really important part of the job. And some of the issues around race that reverberate through those other departments and find manifestations in the school department as well, they really should be addressed not only within their enclaves, but really there should be kind of a town-wide approach to that. And again, when we dealt with this kind of terrible series of anti-Semitic incidents, somehow I kind of got propelled into a community leadership role. And I welcomed that at some level because I thought the work was important, and it was important to bring everybody to the table. But as soon as we got everybody to the table, I said, I'm primarily responsible for the schools, and people need to kind of partner with me from their various, and we built some really wonderful partnerships around that. Our police department, this is just an example of something that I'd love to see happen, possibly in Brookline. We have a wonderful chief of police, Bobby Bongiorno, who was in a training with Cambridge Police, who after the Bill Gates, not Bill Gates, Henry Louis Gates incident in Cambridge, they dug deep and they created a whole different approach to policing, which they called, it's kind of a community-based policing, and I forget the acronym. But at its essence, it says that the police officer, in so many of their interactions, creates trauma, even when unintended, and that their job has to be also to heal that trauma, that it doesn't end after the incident is over, and building relationships with the community is so important. Well, that training was always done with police officers. our police chief said, we're going to do something different in Bedford. We're going to bring the trainers in, and we're going to train our police department in conjunction with community leaders. And so we brought parents, we brought Metco folks, we brought town manager, selectmen, superintendent, and we got the training together with the police department. And I thought that was really, and now the Cambridge people are saying that's the way to do it. We're going to do it all over. And so I would really look to explore partnerships with our various institutions to kind of share resources to try to address these tough issues.
Thank you. And John, I have to read this one or I'll blow it. Bedford has a single K-12. Brookline has 8 K-12 schools that, for better or worse, operate extremely independently. What academic vision and practices would you want to standardize versus keep independent?
So I think that each school has its unique personality, its unique traditions, its unique history, and I cited a few of those earlier today. You know, Lincoln School trains its kids to be docents at the Gardner Museum. It's a very special tradition. Devotion School, I guess, does this wonderful thing around the Kennedys, and it's a kind of a whole project that the kids learn through. I think those things need to be preserved. I think they need to be built upon, and I think they represent the uniqueness. But when it comes to teaching and learning, I think there should be a lot of commonality, whether it's in the approach to literacy, whether it's about really integrating more project-based learning for all kids, whether it's about how teacher teams use data to improve instruction. I think those things need to cross all the schools. And part of the way that I would work to do that is by empowering principals in a different way. And I really would, I think, work to pull principals together as the instructional leaders in their schools to do that same kind of teaming and sharing to identify what are the best practices that are working in their school that should be done in the other school, and really to come with central leadership participation around what the essential approaches to teaching and learning should be. I think Brookline has common learning experiences that are agreed upon. I don't know if they're all followed, and I don't say that necessarily critically, I just don't know, because sometimes those are the things that are up on a shelf. But if those are living documents that the teachers own, then we've come a long way. So I think unique traditions, unique experiences, but also that whatever those experiences represent in terms of the enrichment that happens, it can happen in a different way, but you've got to make sure each school does that for all kids.
Okay, thank you. One more question, and then we'll give you a minute or two to give a closing remark that you would like to. And then if you don't mind, in case there's a question or two, because I had to lump some for time's sake, if there's a question or two that somebody's a burning one, can you hang on for a minute
Sure.
or two afterwards? You don't have the long commute back to...
No, I don't. I would save about, in the next 6 years, over 1,500 hours. It's a lot of time for NPR that will be down the drain, but we'll go.
You can listen to NPR while you play golf.
There you
Okay. Here's the question. I have had principals tell me that there's no bullying in Brookline. And then they say, really? What have you done to raise awareness of bullying, and do you have experience of instances of bullying involving students on IEPs?
So first of all, I think that language is so important. You know, bullying is defined as repeated behavior where there's a power differential, et cetera. And that's important. But I think mean behavior takes all kinds of shapes. It may not rise to the level of bullying, but it's just as damaging to a child. And so for me, it's always been about mean behavior, whether it's isolating a former best friend in a girl's triangle and one's on the outs, or whether it's physical bullying. Both are equally damaging. And I've seen kids driven to attempted suicide. I've seen kids leave schools entirely because they just can't tolerate the, and I don't blame them, the mean behavior. And it's pernicious. It's very hard to solve. And it's in our culture. A lot of people say it's just part of growing up. I'm not sure that's the case because there are a lot of kids that don't do it. And it takes a whole community to address this. It's not just a school issue. A lot of it happens in schools, but now with social media and electronics, digital media, it happens well beyond the boundaries of schools. So we continue to do our best. We certainly have Alveus, and we have some programs like that. But we've tried to take our peer leadership at the high school, for example, and really train kids in addressing these issues and having courageous conversations with their peers. Our social emotional program at our K through 5, makes this the center. For years, our middle school did a lot of work out of, I forget the center, that's done a lot of leadership around this, and that's built into all of our advisories. But teachers have to be vigilant. Teachers have to address it when they see it. Kids are also very good at doing it without being seen, and so it's hard, and it's taken so much of our administrative time when we've had these intractable expressions of meanness between groups of kids or individuals. Certainly have seen students with whose IEPs are about emotional challenges be victimized. And, the law requires us to pay particular attention to that, but just ethically, we try to be sensitive to that as well. And unfortunately, one of the things that happens with kids who may have some challenges socially is that they have behaviors that end up being provocative of other kids, saying funny things to them. And how you help those kids not victimize, without talking about this kid as a special kid, is a real challenge. So we keep working at it. It's hard stuff. It's horrible stuff, for kids.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I was receiving instructions.
No problem.
There are a number of questions that didn't get asked from Facebook and other places, and I'm going to read a few of those, and all those that weren't covered in another set. And then as you do your closing remarks, if there's any of those that you want to pick out and address, we'd like to do that. I just want to acknowledge that we did receive those and read them to the extent that my tired eyes will do. We have new housing developments. We will have over 2,700 high school students. That would make us the third largest high school in the Commonwealth. How do you think creatively about academics, STEM or others, to make the school feel smaller? The next one is, we like a lot of public process in Brookline. I've observed that firsthand. How do you make decisions and communicate efficiently with a very involved public? 10 people can sink a good idea fast. And then this one, these are still from Facebook. Given all the superintendent openings all over the country and the current state of affairs in Brookline public schools, why would you want to be superintendent here? Teaching children to be critical thinkers and to have the ability to evaluate data and information has always involved a broad education. I did that one, sorry. Next one, I would ask further whether they are aware of the suicide prevention efforts happening in Newton, and the approach of David Fleischman has been taking and talking about in public, screening tools, prevention programs, and so on, and what priority they placed on these kind of cultural inventory and change efforts in past jobs. In other words, have you done that in any other jobs? And then the last one, I'd like to know about each candidate, you in this case, John, views the space issues, particularly around the night school and high school, which we did ask you that one. So, okay. So if you want to address any of those and giving a closing one, and I apologize to all those whose questions I did not get to. I tried to get as many in, at least in content, as I could.
I honestly think that in terms of what the essence of each of those questions is, I've kind of touched on a lot of that tonight, and I think it would be repetitive to reach back into them. I will say that, of course, we do our own surveying of student risky behavior. We're astonished every year by the high level of reporting around attempted suicide. It blows our mind that that could be accurate, but the people who advise these say that it's a valid instrument. You know, we've created lots of social emotional supports and programs within our schools to provide, to be able to intervene in effective ways. You know, schooling is so different than it was many years ago when we just didn't seem to deal with those issues. I think that there are a lot of models for taking large schools and turning them into more manageable organizational structures which allow for kids to be known and felt and understood and connected with adults. And I think, you know, if we don't do something like the 8th, 9th grade and we do have this extra large high school, I think we need to research those. They don't always work, and they're not magical, just creating the structures. It's also about putting the right people in place, et cetera. So, you know, I think that that would certainly be something that we would be, you know, that we would need to do. Because, you know, what is unique about Brookline is, again, the kids are able to be who they are in so many different ways. And I think that happens because they feel connected and cared about and safe to do that. We wouldn't want to lose that. So I'm not going to try to answer any of the other questions.
Thanks for that, Tim.
Sure. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for hanging in there. Some of you, I'm sure, 3 nights in a row. This has been, for all of you, quite an involved process. You know, it certainly just says to me how important you know, this is to the community. It's been a wonderful day. I'm ready to go for another 3 or 4 hours, and because I don't have a long commute. As I mentioned, you know, it took me a while to think about kind of putting my hat in this ring, because I love my work where I am. But this day has really, you know, further convinced me of the rightness of this decision. I knew that once I kind of entered the process and got to actually talk with people and meet people and turn an abstraction into what's really it all about, which is relationships and getting a sense of who the parents are and who the school committee people are as individuals, and reconnecting with some wonderful teachers that I had the great privilege of working with before. I would be thrilled and honored and excited to take on this. I think it's a formidable challenge. It's a little frightening. You know, I want to be honest about that. I think if anybody wasn't, they would be, you know, a BS artist, or the kind of person that is so about their own ego and about kind of not worrying about, you know, making an effect. But for me, the only reason to do this is to make a difference. I think I have something to offer, and if I have the opportunity, I will look forward to seeing all of you again. If not, I wish you a lot of luck, and I'll keep following Brookline. So thank you.